Good morning, everyone. We can start now this moment to deep dive on another aspect of circular economy, focusing more on the role of the consumer, of the customer, if you want, for the transition toward a circular economy model. I know that you have already heard many deep dive about circular economy. I'm trying to add a perspective on it that I hope is can add, let me say, some new insights. I go through the presentation, and of course, if you have slide, we can have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. For the question I will try to address in these minutes are above all about one more general about what the role of circular economy in addressing the environmental challenges of our society. Then how the role of product should change. Our relation with product should change to maximize this the potential of circular economy, and then a focus in the perspective more of the cities, trying to understand not only as a customer, but as well as a citizen, what is our role in this transition. I guess you are familiar with the issue of climate change. The point I wanted to highlight it is that there are many environmental challenges that we are dealing with and are strictly interconnected. So in the last years has emerged this vision of the planet boundaries. That means that the planet is facing many environmental challenges. Here are the 9 more relevant ones that are connected one with the other, and therefore you cannot solve one without impacting on the other. Due to this vision of the environmental challenges, the idea of not addressing isolated part of the problem, but to redesign the economic model in order to solve them all is the mainstream approach that is developing. The most known issue is the one of climate change that in the last 4 to 5 years has become an issue of concern at any level, and of course with the COP and all the discussion ongoing, I guess everybody hear about it every day. But this is of course not the only one. Concerning climate change, there are already many initiatives, many technologies under development. Here are just some examples: the photovoltaic, the wind, the electric mobility. Therefore, these are the first step that was addressed in fighting the environmental issue, the more relevant one. But of course, each transition is made up of many aspects. And as I said before, the environmental challenges are not isolated, but are strictly connected. So another aspect related to this overall transition is also related to the material side. I mean, what is the impact of the material we are using? Because of course we need to decarbonize, so to avoid any direct emission, but we can impact on the environment in many other ways. One, for example, is through the materials, because the last study project the fact that many emissions worldwide are due to the material we consume, like iron, steel, cement, plastic, etc. So this is a second aspect of the environmental challenges that is often forgotten. And this is a challenge that is somehow changing because compared to the past, the kind of material we are using are changing. I guess that most of you are familiar with the periodic table. That means the table of the chemical elements that are present in the world. If we compare the need of material that old technology had compared to the new technologies, here, for example, we see a traditional light bulb with a LED bulb. We see that many more material are used to make these technologies that use different physical phenomenon. And many of these material are, by the way, critical materials. So material that are more rare, are more impacting. This is true for most of our technology. If we go to the most known, maybe the phone, the smartphone, moving from the traditional phone that now has disappeared basically to the smartphone, we see that the number of material used increase many times, and often these are critical materials. Again, we see that in a smartphone, we use around 50 materials, and this represent a huge challenge, both in order of procuring all this material, but as well in understanding the impacts and understanding as well the end of life of these materials. Given this issue, I mean, I just mentioned some example, but just to provide the idea of how complex is the issue behind. The vision of circular economy has emerged in the last 10 years, more or less, in terms of a vision that had the aim to decouple somehow our economic model from the resource consumption. So this means both material consumption as well emissions. I mean, to have a model that do not consume natural resources somehow. And this is, of course, at the core of the environmental issue, because, as I said at the beginning, you really need to address positively on all the environmental challenges. So if you do not consume resources, you do not emit, you do not have emission, you do not have waste, etc. Circular economy is often used as synonymous of recycling in the newspaper, in the news, etc., but it is not so. So recycling is part of circular economy, but is somehow the last step of circular economy. Circular economy starts from the beginning, from how we design, what material do we use, how we use our product and asset. So generally, it is represented in terms of 5 pillars. Then, of course, the number of pillars can be modified, but basically the concept are this. That is the inputs, what material do we use, how do we plan the life extension of our assets? So how do we design our products? Because you need to ask yourself from the design phase what will be the recycling and the next life of the product, because everything has been designed accordingly. Then there are the part on how we use our assets, so the solution like sharing, like a product as a service, moving from the ownership to the use. And then at last, there is the new life cycle that can be a reuse, can be remanufacturing, can be recycling. But it is really the last step of the circular economy perspective. And to share an insight on why it is the last step, if you consider, maybe this is a little more technical, but the issue of send products to recycling is positively environmentally, of course, but depends much on how much material do you recover, because anyhow, if the recycling efficiency is low, at each cycle you lose much of the material. So recycling is actually effective if you are able to achieve a really high recycling efficiency. And this can be only achieved through ad hoc design from the beginning. I mean, you really need to design your product in order to maximize the efficiency, because this is the only way to really keep all the resources in the loop. So this is a simple example, but show how critical it is, the role of design, even if we are speaking about recycling. Another important aspect to mention about circular economy is the approach. I mean, the customer approach, basically. We generally, the consumerism is considered a phase of the consumption approach that began after the Second World War. Here there is a picture from Life magazine that was from the 55, that is celebrating the throwaway living. That means the possibility to throw away stuff, because there was the introduction of the plastic and all this material that allow to throw away stuff. It was seen as an improvement. I mean, because it was a show also of on one side of better economical conditions, on the other as well, no need anymore to clean, for example. So it was really an easier way of life. Of course, this approach has lasted for decades, and now we are starting seeing a change from this, because people are starting reconsidering this throwaway approach. Above all, I could say because we are now being aware of the environmental impact of what this has created in the last decades, because besides the climate change, as well as the ocean pollution, or many other topics we deal with every day, show clearly how unsustainable this approach has become. This is emerging as well in the survey that are carried out with customer. So there is the evidence that the focus of customer is no more about this extreme consumerism, above all among the new generation. So, and there is as well a desire of having also a positive impact on environment throughout our consumption patterns. This is true in many ways. I mean, it could be about as well the sharing. Car sharing is a typical example, for example, or the local value chains. This applies as well to the food, not to all the slow food movement, etc., as well to the issue of avoiding waste. So there is a sensitivity that is expanding, and maybe now today the issue about it is if the sustainable approach should be more expensive or should be competitive. Maybe this is still something that is under discussion, but nonetheless there is a strong movement among consumers to push companies toward a sustainable approach, and a rigorous sustainable approach, because there is of course the issue of greenwashing that is a big concern, because it's not always so straightforward, so easy to understand if a new solution is actually sustainable or it is not. So it's really needs also to deep dive on the real impact that they have. Just to show a few examples, I wanted to mention what some companies are doing in this perspective. I pick example from company that you are familiar with. So one is about Nike. They have implemented design guidelines for themselves and for their suppliers, trying to address the issue of circularity from the real beginning. This basically is implemented throughout a set of pillars that concern material and energy they choose, the cyclability, the waste avoidance, the refurbishment, versatility, that means the possibility to reuse in for the different destination, and durability, I mean the actual durability of the stuff. So here they implemented this pillar that are the more useful for their kind of product, but the concept that you see now here are pretty much the same concept that are applied in any sector. And in this perspective, Nike, but as well Adidas and other shoes company are working, for example, in order to design shoes made of one single material, because this, going back to the example of recycling I made before, improve much the possibility of recovering material at the end of the life, because the more the material are easy separable, the more you can really recover and recycle the material. So they're really trying to implement this from the beginning, and they're trying to do it involving all their suppliers, because this is another important takeaway of circular economy. You cannot do it alone. I mean, you need really to involve all your value chain from the extraction phase down to all the step of each supplier to the next supplier in order to implement circularity throughout the whole value chain. Another well-known brand, Ikea, they as well are working much on circular economy. We often discuss the topic with them. And again, they created their circular product design guidelines. They defined their pillars, that is standardization, adaptability, renewable and recycled, care, repair, and recyclability, that are not exactly the same of Adidas, but basically the concept behind are the same. So everything goes back to the 5 pillars we mentioned at the beginning. Ikea was already a, let me say, considered a sustainable brand somehow, but they put a strong effort on circular economy, and they are also pushing much the reuse side of their product. So as well in Scandinavia, they have opened a store of Second Life stuff, the products from Ikea. I guess as well in Italy, they are doing something of that kind, and they are working much on the design, on the measurement of their products. Another example, like this as well, quite well known, is Patagonia. That is pushing much also on the consumption habit of their customer, because they are encouraging their customer not to buy new products, but to take care of their stuff. So Patagonia started the services to repairing the jacket or the garment, the products of their customers. Therefore, pushing for an approach focused on maintenance, on repairing, on keeping the asset, and not on replacing this. This, of course, is connected as well to the fact that Patagonia is a high-level brand. So their product are a high-level product, and this is easier and more competitive to be managed. So they are quite away from the fast consumption perspective. These are just some examples that beyond the environmental benefits, that is quite clear, have also further benefits, because many of these solutions are not necessarily adopted from customers just for environmental reasons, but can have further benefits. For example, about saving, I mean, because you avoid buying new, or you can buy second-hand products. If you rely on local supplier, for example, there is also less risk of disruption in the supply. And there are other ways to improve to save money, because all the sharing, for example, goes in that direction as a product as a service. So also the success that car sharing is having in cities is also related to this, that at the end, according, of course, to the frequency you use the car, but it's an opportunity on one side to have less worries about your car, and second, to pay just for the use, not to have to keep something that you basically use 2% of the time. And this approach from the supply, from the brand, the companies, can help also to have more durable, repairable, and recyclable products. For example, in France, it was introduced the law last year, for which the brand has to declare what is the level of repairability of their products, so that the client, when they buy a product, they know if they will be able to repair, and how expensive it will be to repair it. So try to approaching the product in a life perspective, not in a throwaway perspective, as in the picture from the Life magazine of the past. And this can be as well an extra income opportunity in somehow, because also the fact that the goods have a longer life, can be sold again when you do not use them, could be also an opportunity of income integration somehow. Then more in general, the sharing economy that is a part of the circular economy. Sharing is about when there is a condivision of an asset between peers. This represents as well a social opportunity, somehow creates a new way of interaction, can be related also to interaction at the neighborhood level. So this is moving to a new perspective as well in how to manage the economic activities, and can also be an opportunity of saving, because basically people can start sharing assets, sharing time, sharing services. So on one side, improve the accessibility to services, and on the other, strengthen the interaction, the collaboration between people, above all physically in a location. I move now to the part that I mentioned at the beginning about cities, how this is relevant for cities. Just to give a framework about the cities, in the last years there have been many discussions on how cities should evolve. It was already ongoing before the COVID pandemic, and during the COVID, this discussion on the future of city has further increased, because, of course, as doubts, discussion on the future of cities has emerged. But city basically we're already trying to understand how to improve the quality of life of their citizens. I mean, how to remain an important focal place of human life. I mean, why should people live in cities? There was a part related to the economic opportunity, the studying opportunity, etc. But there was also an issue on quality of life. So cities worldwide were trying to understand how to improve the quality of life for their citizens. And many cities have focused on circular economy as a lever to redesign themselves. Therefore, in the last year has emerged this concept of circular city that has now become mainstream, and we are seeing this developing not only in Europe, but as well, for example, in Latin America, where there has been a strong focus on this in the last year, for example, and as well in US. So it's a relevant trend. Here I was, without getting into the theory on all the discussion, because of course it's beyond the time we have, but I just wanted to share a few examples of some cities, how they are approaching it. The first is Paris, that has created their circular economy roadmap, and at the same time has been one of the promoters of the 15-minute city concept. That is basically the vision that each citizen should have the right, I mean, to access the services they need within a 15-minute walk. So the idea is that you should have the school at 15-minute walk, the library, the hospital, etc. So trying really to redesign the city in order that services are easily accessible. And this, of course, could represent a strong shift, because this would stop the need for a car, I mean, or at least strongly decrease the need of cars, and would allow the street to be up to the pedestrians, to the people to use them. I mean, would push for as well a different approach to shopping. So this really is, so far they have just started, I mean, since 1 year and a half, but is an experiment that could really reshape the city. And then they are working on many other directions. They're working on the issue of waste, on the food, on the waste food, for example, that today represent 30% of the food that at the end ends up as waste. So in many cities, there are projects on this. And then, of course, there is a part related to roadwork waste, I mean, to address the waste in all this dimension. And, of course, all the part also related to the bicycle mobility, etc. So Paris, in this respect, represents an important example, and above all is the fact that they have a vision behind. And this connects to the topic of the customer we were talking about before, because at the end, to implement circularity in a city, in parts depends on the institution, of course. In parts depends, of course, on the citizens, ourselves, and on the choices we make, both as a citizen and as a customer. Amsterdam is a leading example on this because maybe they were the first to do it. They created their vision to 2050 on circular economy. They're trying to integrate the circular economy perspective as well with the social impact that it can have. Therefore, referring to the so-called donut economics, that is something that has emerged more recently, but that basically connects the environmental issue with the social issue, trying to address them throughout circular economy. And they are working as well to redesign the city, and for example, doing it throughout innovation. So they are really pushing on startup and trying to use the public procurement phase to scale up the solution proposed from the startup. This is an approach that there is also in Barcelona, for example. I mean, to identify the key challenges of the city and then trying to find solution throughout open innovation challenge in startup, and then once the solution are identified, try to scale them up. And I guess this is the last example about London. Them as well are working on this approach, trying to implement throughout their key activities. So the building to recover the material at the end of the building, try to implement this criteria of circularity in all the new initiative, etc. So at each city has different approaches to circularity, but the approach behind is pretty much the same. And it's important to note that although the company, the institution, the customer, each of them approach in a different perspective, the key pillars, the key vision behind is always the same. It's really about decoupling what we do from the consumption of new resources. Just a couple of slides to close about, because we have spoken much about what others are doing. Just wanted to share also what Enel is doing. And on this, the first step is about, of course, on the reduce our emissions. So this is an important step because each company has to start from their core business in implementing circularity and sustainability. So we have a strong commitment on reducing our emission. I mean, reducing by 80% in the next 10 years, more or less, and to be completely decarbonized in 2050. And to do this in a circular economy perspective. So trying really to redesign whatever we do. So, for example, also our impact on materials. And to do this, we are working with our suppliers. So with our procurement, we are measuring the circularity of what we buy and collaborating with our suppliers to find a new solution. This is important because find a new circular solution is not just the task of the suppliers. It also implies that we have to reconsider our requirements in order to allow suppliers to find new solutions. We are implementing circular economy on our key assets because we are developing many new plants, wind plants, photovoltaic plants, electric recharging station, smart grid, etc. And we plan circularity ahead in order to realize this new infrastructure in a circular economy perspective from the beginning, because I said that a few slides ago, you need first of all to address in the design phase, and then there is the Enel that the division that is working for the final customer, that has a really strong focus on circularity and above all on circular cities. So they are really working worldwide in many cities, developing projects related to circularity. So of course electric vehicles, for example, but as well Our recharging station are made from reused plastic. I mean, trying really to connect all the aspect of circularity in everything they do. And the other point I wanted to mention is about cities. We are focusing on it through Enel, of course, but more in general, we are collaborating with many cities worldwide in really trying to understand what can be our contribution in a broader perspective. Because as well, for the transition of city, we are covering an important part, because we are in the energy production, the mobility, in all the final use. But to find a more impacting solution, you also need to collaborate not only with institutions, but as well with other sectors that are part of the city life, trying to integrate and scale up all the solution and all the impacts. I could stop here, because anyhow we have already touched many topics, and I could leave if there is questions or doubts or intervention about the topic that we just mentioned. I guess the question should be written in the chat. What about materials that we cannot stop consuming? Will they ever become circular? Well, yes. I mean, the idea basically, first of all, the idea is really to move from consumption to use. So the idea in circular economy is to try to move completely or to renewable sources or to recycled sources. On many material, it is already in this direction. I think, for example, to copper, to steel, on this material, there are already quite high level of recycling. The real issue is not the material, but the design behind, because you need to have products that allow to recover these materials. If they are not designed accordingly, then it's difficult to do it. So the issue is really about how these products are designed, and we have already important example in this direction, because, for example, the Nike with the shoes, but as well on smartphones, there are projects to design smartphones that are completely reusable. Another important aspect is, for example, the modularity, because maybe if you want a new feature in your smartphone, you have to throw away the current one and buy a new one. If the design of the smartphone were modular, I mean that you can replace just a piece of it, you could upgrade it without replacing the whole. I mean, there are many solutions actually ongoing, and the idea is to have our products circular. Then, of course, the circularity maybe could not be 90, could be not 100%, but the point is really to achieve a level of circularity pretty high, because you need to achieve value, 90% or stuff like this, because if we go back to the example of the can we saw at the beginning, can has a life cycle, weeks, months. So if every time you lose 50% of the material, after 1 year, you have already lost everything. So you really need to achieve high level of circularity, and through design is how this is implementing. For example, what can we use to substitute concrete to build bridges or skyscrapers? This is an interesting question. Actually, there are many pilots, let me say, using wood. For example, there are, I'm not sure about skyscraper, but pretty high building that are being tested using wood, and wood is tested as well for some industrial application. So there is, on one side, they are working on trying to replace material, replace material with natural material. Then, of course, you have also to see how the wood is produced. But this is one way to replace material, moving always to natural material that can have important performances. The other one is to trying to make the loop, close the loop of the concrete. Try to understand, we need to introduce this amount of concrete, but we can recover the concrete at the end of the life. So this is what is happening basically with the copper, for example. you have a huge amount of copper already in the system, but you try not to throw it away, but to have a high level of recovery. So basically, to try to completely move to a circular economy approach, you need to push towards renewable sources, recovery of the material in use, and of course there will be a part of new material that will be introduced in the system, but this should be decreased much more compared to today's levels. I hope I have answered. As a consumer, I ask, what if a person cannot afford to be sustainable? Sometimes it's very expensive. Yeah, this is a point. The point is actually, to be sustainable should be more expensive or not? Well, personally, I think not. The solution should be competitive, and this can be achieved redesigned from the beginning. Because generally the point it is that to make sustainable product, it is done as the company, let me say, does the product in the old way and then adds something on. And in this way, of course, you cannot be competitive. The point is really trying to redesign the whole value chain, try to find the innovative solution. In some cases, this is competitive because the rationale behind, if you think about it, to better use material, recover the value, move to renewable, by itself, they should be competitive, in this sense. So the fact that often sustainable solutions are not competitive could be on one side or related to the fact that are just in the initial phases. So it could be a temporary issue. The other could be that the solution adopted is not the right one, because for this product, it has not been properly innovator designed the whole value chain. If I think, for example, to the car sharing, for example, is an example of solution that is competitive. Or the local value chain often should be competitive. In other cases, sustainable products are not. But this, I think that basically to scale it up, because if it is not competitive, it will remain something for a few people. To make this real transition about circular economy we mentioned before, it has to be competitive. This is true as well for us, for Enel, for example. We are pursuing circular solution, but we need this solution to be as well competitive. Otherwise, of course, you lose your competitivity compared to other companies that do not do it. So circularity need to be competitive, definitely, as well, because also the name circular economy implies the concept of economic competitive behind. Well, there are many choices. Of course, you can have. You can consider what you buy. About the food, for example. You can move to local value chain to use an electric vehicle instead a traditional one. So there are, of course, you cannot be totally. Of course, you do not can. Let me say. Verify everything you buy, what is the whole value chain, etc. But on the main topic, you can anyhow take some decision in one direction or the other. So, for example, the electric mobility is something I choose, or the value chain, the supply you choose. These are already decisions that can somehow push in this direction. When you buy something, to try to consider if it is something that can have a long life, can be repaired, or to buy throwaway stuff. So there are, I would say, some easy decisions that can be made. Then, of course, other that imply the analysis of the value chain, etc., are more complicated and will take time before, as a customer, we will be able to really have a clear picture of what we do. But already with some decision we take, we can already show our focus on the topic or not. The 15-minute city is a big issue. Of course, it's more difficult to do it in already built city. But this is on one side. You can first well, there is one issue is the planning of the city. Often what happens in the city, it is that you have all the shopping center in a place, all the houses in another, all the working places in another. So people are focused to commute. So what Paris is doing, for example, is to creating, supporting, let me say, for example, the fact that there are more distributed shops, so more small shops, more distributed, to create, on one side, they are working as well on digitalization, because some service you can digitalize. For example, speaking about hospital, there is something that is the digital health, that is something as well Enel is working on it, that is about provide some services from remote. That of course is not the recovery, but could be the diagnostic, etc. So in some respect, digitalization can help. On others, planning can help. You can anyhow try to push the city not to be anymore with dedicated cluster of activity, but to have it more distributed throughout the city. Then, of course, as well in school is an issue, but as well this is something that they are trying to plan and try to optimize. Then, of course, you could not achieve the total 15-minute city concept, and maybe it would not even make sense, because otherwise we would end up everybody living in its own village. The point, I think, that in a city, of course, if you want to go to the football stadium or you want to go to the theater, there will be, of course, one theater. But the real point it is that for the everyday services you need, that could be the shopping, the school, the sporting structure, etc., you could be able to achieve. So even if they will not achieve exactly the 15 minutes, I think that already the push in this direction could be quite important. And this has a further positive impact, that is the fact that if you take away cars from the street, this, from one side, you recover much space for other things, because streets could be for other destination and not for parking cars or for traffic. But as well, you make safer, because if you, for example, in Paris, they are pushing the cycling lane, and this is also a safer way of moving, allow children to get out on the street, elderly people to move. So it really seems a marginal change, but really reshaped the city, because one of the main events that shaped today's city was the introduction of car. Car really reshaped our city. And to move away from it can help to move in the previous direction, because if you think about it, I mean, medieval, Italian middle-aged cities were quite close to the 15-minute concept, of course, because you had to have many services around each neighborhood. Okay, I think that there are no more questions, but these were anyhow really interesting questions, and thanks for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.